Following the humiliating defeat at the hands of Alparslan, the Eastern Roman Empire was given generous terms and could still field a massive army, which was well trained and equipped. However, the court in Constantinople rejected the terms and waged a short but costly civil war against Romanos. Bulgarian rebels, supported by Serbia, raised a pretender, Constantine Budin, in 1072, who took Skopje and defeated the strategos of the Bulgarian theme. Niš and Ohrid quickly fell before the empire could organize a response. Of the 12,000-strong army, many were fresh recruits, with some veterans from Manzikert, as well as 1,500 Varangians and 500 Franks. Once Roussel learned that the army crossed the Bosphorus, he gathered his own 3,000 men, most of whom were knights. The two armies met on the 10th of May 1074 on the bridge of the Sangarios River, not far from Amorium, which was the Norman power base. The Romans offered amnesty to the adventurer, but their offer was rejected. This was the pivotal moment when desperation forced the Roman hand to choose the lesser evil. After losing his bid for the Seljuk throne against Alparslan, Suleiman and his three brothers fled to the Taurus Mountains back in 1064, and he became the sole survivor after multiple punitive raids. Now that Melik Shah I ruled the Seljuk Empire, which was weakening, Suleiman managed to establish himself in the region, which had the exact same climate conditions as the steppe, but was detached from the authority of Isfahan. The nomads raided but also traded with the local Byzantines, who were themselves cut off from Constantinople, when suddenly Suleiman received an offer which would not only make him an ally of the empire, but also formalize his territorial claims and fill his pockets. All he had to do was deal with Roussel, who just sacked Chrysopolis near Constantinople. The Norman finally met his match as he fell for the classic feigned retreat and was captured by the Seljuks. But before Constantinople could send their ransom, his wife showed up with a generous amount of gold, and the Seljuks released him. Desperation really kicked in, and Michael used his connection to Georgia via his wife Maria to convince Tsar George II to hold the eastern frontier and capture Roussel in return for Theodosiopolis, Tau and Kars. The crucial cities and forts were handed over, but the Georgian army failed, with many joining the Norman cause. All seemed lost, but the Byzantines were well aware that if this was not handled quickly, rebellions would erupt elsewhere, proclaiming John as their rightful leader. The next candidate to step up to the job was Alexios Komnenos, a 20-year-old energetic and charismatic man who was appointed commander-in-chief and sent to deal with Roussel without any significant funds or army. Roussel was brought to the city of Amasya, but the problem was that Alexios didn't have the funds he promised, so he turned to the local populace. Surprisingly, the locals preferred the Norman garrison and grew fond of their prince, who, unlike the empire, protected them from Turkic raids. In order to convince them, Alexios blindfolded Roussel and announced that he was blinded and was in no condition to defend them anymore. This plan worked, and after gathering the funds and paying the Seljuks, Alexios returned to Constantinople victorious and locked him in a dungeon in 1076. This is a good point to shift to the other side of our narrative, as in 1076, the growing tensions between Pope Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV erupted into what is now known as the investiture controversy. The boundaries between the imperial and papal authority were always blurred, but Gregory was an overly ambitious and influential pope who reformed the church, enforcing celibacy for the clergy, and preached the idea of an organized papal army led by the pontiff. First, there was Philaretos Frachamios, who carved out a very large piece of the empire centered around Antioch after the Battle of Manzikert. He proclaimed himself emperor and slowly expanded his realm by attacking other Roman cities. Secondly, a federation of cities on the Danube River broke off and sided with the nomadic Pechenegs. In November 1077, the most powerful man in the Balkans, governor of the Dyrrhachian theme, Nikephoros Vrienios, also proclaimed himself emperor and gathered a coalition of supporters filled with veteran soldiers, as he himself was a capable commander. Lastly, we have Nikephoros Botaniates, the 76-year-old governor of the Antolikon theme, with very few supporters or credentials, who rebelled in October 1078. Vrenios took action, and after taking over much of the western territories, marched on Constantinople, hoping the people would embrace him, but after he was rejected, he raided the suburbs. Pecheneg riders also rode south, hoping to plunder some villages, forcing the pretender to pull back. In the meantime, Botaniates was well aware that he could not take the city on his own, so he pushed the next domino in our story by hiring Seljuk mercenaries. After he took Nicaea, he stationed many of them as garrison forces in western Anatolia, including key cities like Pergamon, Ephesus and Sardis, cities these steppe raiders could hardly take on their own, with the assumption that the moment he asked for them to leave, they would follow his command. Back in Constantinople, the aristocracy knew they had to pick a side, so they chose not based on merit, but on how easy it would be to control the next ruler. The city rebelled, forcing Michael to abdicate, and Botaniates was invited to take the throne, which he did as Nikephoros III. The new emperor made a deal with the wife of Michael, Maria. She married him in exchange for the recognition of her child Constantine Ducas as the heir to the throne. Nikephoros III then proceeded to hand out the customary gifts and titles, but doubled down by forgiving all debt and expanding various rights to secure the rule of his new dynasty. One of those titles was that of Caesar, or second in command, which was offered to Vrenios but was rejected. Phrahamios, on the other hand, agreed to accept him as emperor in return for control over his territory stretching between the key cities of Antioch, Melitene and Edessa. However, the rebellions didn't die out, and Vrenios was able to take over most of the Balkans, forcing Nikephoros III to appoint Alexios to crush him. While we now tend to think of Alexios as a capable ruler, at the time of his coronation, the Sultanate of Rum was handed most of Anatolia and supported another pretender to the throne, a usurper. The Normans were about to invade. Control over Serbia and Bulgaria was nominal. The alliance of the Danubian cities was in rebellion, supported by the Pechenegs. The treasury was empty, the manpower was depleted, and the solidus fell to 10% gold content. No man alive could unify the bickering families and hold the empire together while also campaigning against this many enemies. But Alexios' mother, Anna Dalaseni, was no man. Alexios' mother not only played a pivotal role in his rebellion, but was the real power behind the administration for the next 15 years, second only to her son. She arranged marriage alliances and delicately balanced the power between the most powerful people in the empire. The previous approach of purging political opponents was abandoned and replaced with mercy and amnesty. Many old titles were discarded, and instead new ones were created. Nikephoros Melisinos was pardoned and made Caesar, as well as the governor of Thessaloniki. The extended Komnenos family was given important posts. Precious gifts were sent to the Pope, Doge, Holy Roman Emperor, and various Italian lords, while Alexios mustered an army to meet Robert Guiscard. Despite numerous setbacks, Alexios and his coalition held out long enough until Guiscard died of malaria in 1085. But in order to repay the Venetian allies who made this victory possible, Alexios made considerable concessions to the Republic. The Doge was granted the new hereditary title of Protosevastos, making him the fourth in imperial seniority. The Venetians were granted gold, honors, and several churches in the empire. Shops, houses, and 3 landing stages were granted on the Golden Horn, and all Venetian traders were exempt from customs duties and sea taxes. In return, Venice was to answer when called upon and defend the Adriatic border. This caused a drastic shift and would spiral out of control as Western trade colonies drove the local merchants out of a job